Okay, next will be the Louisiana State Board of Private Investigator Examiners. Okay, and y'all did fill out cards, correct? Okay. Okay, just state your name and start speaking.
Just a second, sit down. My name is Annette Kovac. I represent the 5th Public Service District for the state of Louisiana on the Louisiana State Board of Private Investigator Examiners. I am chairman of this board.
Okay.
We have 5 public service districts that are represented. We have an attorney that is also appointed by the governor and an LPIA member that is also appointed by the governor. And our main function is to license and regulate investigators that are licensed in the state of Louisiana and make sure that they meet all the criteria that's set forth and protect the public from unscrupulous investigators. Prior to its inception, there was no licensing, and anybody could go out and hang out a shingle and be a private investigator. Now there are rules and guidelines that go by, and there's education, which Ms. Dugas will be talking about momentarily, that we have to keep up with the laws and things like that. We are self-funded, and I'm going to turn the mic over now to Mr. Pat Inglade.
Okay, sure. Go ahead,
Good
Pat.
morning. Pat Inglade, I'm the Executive Director of the State Board of Private Investigators, and coming from a law enforcement background, I wasn't really sure what private investigators did until I got into this position. I always assumed they were all Magnum PI, but I found out that wasn't always the case. The board is self-funded. Every bit of business that we do, it comes from the fees that are generated by the licensing requirements of the PIs of the state of Louisiana. We regulate those licenses very carefully. We do a tremendous background check on these people. There has been, over the last few years, an increase in exactly what private investigators are doing in these days and times. Typically, we would think of a PI as one that's sitting in a corner somewhere watching a husband come home or waiting to see if he's with another woman. But over the years, we've seen that progress into more of a fraud investigations. That seems to be taking over the industry at a greater amount right now. Because of the hurricanes that have come through the state of Louisiana, unfortunately, and now because of BP, we have a number of private investigative agencies and private investigators in the state that are working on contracts now that are reporting straight to the Department of Justice. They're going over the claims that BP paid during that period in time, and they're investigating them for fraud, and those cases will be turned over to the Department of Justice. It's essential that something that important to the people in the state of Louisiana should be protected by people that we know would meet the criteria in the background that we would expect. It also is I believe, a tremendous asset to the people of Louisiana, who would also expect that the person that they hire as a private investigator would have their background checked, be competent, be able to withstand any kind of scrutiny, and it's also a method for them to turn in any improper conduct that any PI did. So those are basically what we do. We have a number of colleges in the state of Louisiana that teach our courses. There are 10 right now in the state of Louisiana that are contracted through the board, and they provide the 40-hour course that is mandated under law that PIs are required to go through. Last year we had about approximately 215 people attend those classes, and they put them to work after that. But it's an improving industry. I think it's becoming more important now. in these days and times when law enforcement seems to be having their hands full with other issues. I think that PIs are now starting to take some of those responsibilities away.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Maria Duga. I'm the LPIA member at large on the Louisiana State Board of Private Investigator Examiners. I'm also the chairman of training and education for the board, which is, I submitted, I hope it's in your packets, sort of a memo. What I'd like to start with first is sort of an overview of what our board is in terms of the industry, because like Pat said, I've been licensed since 1997, but my background is paralegal work, and now I'm currently in law school. So I can see kind of how the profession of private investigating can integrate throughout the scope of the legal profession, as well as a comparison to national in terms of licensing, as well as the educational process. But in terms of licensing, originally when the legislature decided to comprise a board and just thought that our industry deserved to be licensed, we were under Title 37, and we're under the Department of Public Safety. We are an independent board, like Annette had said, comprised of 5 service districts throughout the state. We have one member who's appointed from the LPIA, which is myself, and we also have an attorney who sits on the board who acts as the hearing officer, because our board is also an adjudicating agency. When complaints are filed and they do get to the process where there is a formal hearing, we do adjudicate different issues that come before us. We exercise judgments against people, revoke their licenses. We've had several licenses that have been revoked over the year for impropriety or crimes or criminal charges, basically, either related to private investigative activities or activities which cause the license to be revoked due to the licensing standards. But basically, we issue 4 types of licenses. We have an agency license, which is ultimately the person who has the contact with the client or the industry or individual who is actually doing the work. We have the individual license holder, we have the apprentice license holder, and we recently added into legislation the journeyman license holder, which is similar to a contractor license, which allows you to work for multiple agencies. The individual, apprentice, and journeyman all must work directly for an agency. Those licenses do not require the same depth of experience that an agency does, so those license holders cannot work directly for the general public. The licensing fees for an agency and a journeyman are $250, and for a PI and apprentice are about $100. As a board member, well, I'll get to that in a minute. Let's see. On the sheet, I did a comparison of all the states. Of all the states, all 50 states, 42 states require or have statewide licensing of private investigators. 3 states have licensing that's pretty much throughout the state, but it's jurisdictional based. It's more of like based on the parish or county levels in those common law states. And 5 states do not require PI licenses at all. However, 2 of the states, Colorado and South Dakota, currently have pending legislation to put a licensing board in place. Roughly, you know, I think Pat and Annette have encompassed what private investigators do. I think the essential thing, no matter what we do in terms of the broad band of computer forensics, surveillance, insurance fraud, you know, that we do, ultimately the work product that we do is gathering evidence for presentation in court. So we are an integral part of the legal system. Even for indigent defenders, there's several Fifth Circuit court cases that say that, you know, a private investigator appointment is paramount to a right to counsel. So a lot of times in those cases when someone is charged with certain levels of crimes, a private investigator is appointed and money is allotted for that within the budget. The main thing that I do with the board, and that I think is the essential part of what licensing promotes in terms of private investigators, is, like Pat said, to ensure that we have competent individuals out there. You know, we all hope that everyone who's in their industry or in their chosen profession is competent. But what our licensing does, and through the training process, it puts those safeguards in place, and it provides the tools for people to be competent and to exceed to succeed in the private investigative industry. The one thing we do require, like Pat said, is the 40-hour training course. And right now we are in the process of revising the manual that the private investigators use, because part of the training course is having them understand what the private investigative law is. We also go over the rules and regulations with them, as well as go into state and federal laws which affect the private investigative industry. Laws that deal with trespassing, serendipitous video voyeurism, things that could affect or impact our industry, criminal trespassing, peeping Tom, so that when we are gathering evidence, we are doing it lawfully so that the evidence is admissible. We also go into different things about deposition, trial testimony. We have different areas that we are adding in there, specifically sort of a more practical point of surveillance techniques. We have information about the Louisiana legal system and the codification of the civil code over the years and how it is and how we need to use it as investigators. Evidentiary issues. Discovery also, too, is very important. But the thing I want you to understand as our board, and it's one of the things I've always tried to promote in being frugal with our funds, is in the past this training manual, and it is, dealing with the laws and so many of them in there, it has to be updated. I mean, you guys go into the session and you send out tons of new laws that we have to now integrate or update into our manual. So in the past, the manual over the past few years has cost, over $50,000 plus to update and to have different law professors or people come in and make those revisions. What we're doing now as prudent administrators of our board funds is using law students at the law school that I go to through the pro bono program. We have 8 top-ranked law students along with 2 law professors that are working on the revisions to this manual. And it is totally a comprehensive learning ground foundation of what private investigators need. Not everything they need, but it's a good foundational start for them as to where they go and different things they might do and different things they might encounter. The other thing that we require is, also on the training course, all instructors for the training course their qualifications are mandated by statute, and we do approve all instructors who teach the 40-hour course. And the 40-hour course is only taught at colleges or institutions of higher education. The continuing education, they require 8 hours per year. Recently, the board developed a policies and procedures, which basically is a comprehensive collaboration of all the continuing education requirements, standards for submitting different programs for approval, and we added into the 8 hours a requirement of 1 hour of PI laws and ethics, because and it's one thing I guess I'm picking up from in the legal profession and having to take a class specifically on legal profession and ethics. Sometimes we take for granted the things that we should do and things that we think we should do. So that's basically what the course does. It addresses the investigator-client relationship, the investigator's relationship with third parties, and the things that we can do legally within the realm of the law. So that's one thing that we've also done. In terms of board meetings, our board meets every other month, roughly 6 times a year. We do actively work outside the board meetings. I can tell you the Training and Education Committee is very busy outside board meetings in terms of approval of courses for education as well as instructors. But additionally, the board is not paid any per diem. We do get reimbursed for mileage. Board members may or may not choose to do that. I personally get no reimbursement from the board. Board has a website, which is a great tool for us because it provides information to our license holders of all the things that we are doing and implementing, like the continuing education and training policies and procedures is available online. The new forms that we're putting in place for approval of certain things is there. Our laws, our rules and regulations, it's all compiled in one location so that, you can go there. The office is also staffed with Pat, who I was the executive director, as well as 2 administrative people within the office to handle the licensing applications that come in, preparations of things for the meetings and things like that, complaints, and we do have an investigatory officer in-house with the board also to investigate complaints. Complaints is the next thing I was getting to. Complaints generally come from the public. Either someone has had an encounter with someone who's either unlicensed or a licensed person who has acted inappropriately or somehow committed professional misconduct. When those complaints come in, they're referred to our board investigatory officer, and then we have Delhan in place who goes out and actually does investigations on these individuals. Sometimes claims and fines are settled. Sometimes they come to a hearing. Sometimes it's handled as an informal hearing. One of the situations we had that came before the board in terms of complaints that was a fairly serious thing, that the individual's license was revoked, was someone who had partnered with a police agency was selling NCIC reports. The access and information that private investigators have access to without regulation by licensing board is some information that can be misused. And this individual chose to misuse that information. He ended up as part of a federal investigation, and subsequently his license was revoked, and he can no longer practice.
Let me ask you a question.
Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we have several people want to ask questions,
Okay.
and you might have went another hour. I'd have forgotten my question.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, how many complaints on average per year do you handle?
I'll defer to Pat on that.
Total complaints in the neighborhood of 25, 30. There are more.
Per year?
Yes, sir. But there are a number of small, what we consider not serious complaints that are mostly due to pay disputes between the parties that we attempt to settle out. We don't consider those. Somebody felt like they paid a PI to do a certain job and didn't get the results they did. We typically work those out, and we don't consider those as a major category complaint.
Shows here on the sheet that you provided us that the board received and opened a total of 13 complaints against licensed and unlicensed investigators in 2010.
Right.
Was that a normal year?
It depends on the year.
But that was less than normal, you would say?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. There were 1 informal hearings in 2010. 1 hearing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There were no formal hearings held in 2000. 1 informal, 0 formal hearings. Is
That's
that correct? Okay. The board assessed a total of $1,006 in fines.
That's correct.
That was it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And a total of $19,000 in fines remain uncollected.
Correct.
Okay. Why do they remain uncollected?
We have turned those over to the Attorney General's office. They refuse to pay the fines.
Okay. They refuse to pay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you did turn it over, right?
Yes, sir.
How many attorneys do you have hired by the board?
We're in contract with the Attorney General's office that provides our basic jobs that we do as a board every day, and then we have one more that's a contract employee that we use periodically for complaints or hearings.
What year were you hired, sir?
2006. Okay.
This board has been in existence since what year again, please?
1993.
93?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's talk about this manual that you were talking about.
Yes, sir.
There was a lawsuit about this manual. Is that correct?
No, sir, not specifically about the manual. It's about continuing education. The manual is part of the training program, the required training course.
Okay. I'm just going to read this. An example of governmental waste, the LSBPIE spent $50,000 plus on a teaching manual that was slated to cost only $10,000. This individual sued the board for violating his civil rights and settled with him for over $50,000. Is that correct?
That was
related to continue from. I was not a member of the board at that time. I've only been appointed to the board since 2009. However, I've read all the legislative audit reports on our board, in the past, as well as try to get up to speed on what was going on. And I have spoken to the individual who you're talking about also. I regular contact with him. He sends me.
I haven't mentioned any names, and I'm not going to mention any names.
I know, and I'm not. I won't
Okay.
either, but
Okay.
I know who you're talking about. My understanding is that it was related to continuing education, that he was somehow denied from teaching or providing continuing education or being an instructor
Right.
for the 40-hour course. It had nothing to do specifically for the manual itself.
Let me ask you this. Why could not, let's just use the state police, for example, why could they not do the function that you're doing?
In terms of licensing?
Everything.
Okay. Can I address one other thing that
Sure,
you
go
mentioned
ahead.
earlier?
Sure.
In terms of complaints, our numbers are low, and I think it should speak to a positive to us and not a negative, because I think it speaks to exactly what our board is supposed to do. Through licensing of applications, background checks, and making sure that our agencies are knowledgeable and competent, we reduce the number of people who are out there actually, conducting inappropriate activity. So I think that the fewer complaints we have speaks to that our agency is actually training and ensuring that we are licensing competent individuals. In terms of, I'll address both of them. I'll address state police and I'll address consolidation with another board. Consolidation with another board, I think in both situations, when you look at state police and possible consolidation, is to go back to the legislative intent of when our licensing board was formed. It was put under, and part of the board composition is the fact that everyone on the board is a licensed private investigator with at least 5 years experience and 90% of our gross income coming from within the industry. Okay, so we have a unique understanding of what it is we are required to do, what we should do, and how to ensure that we have people out there who can do it properly. And then we have also an attorney on the board who helps with the legal logistics. To put us with another board, or to possibly even to consolidate us with the police department, I think at that point we are looking at, being put under. We'll have maybe budgetary issues, because in the past, when I worked with the legislature in 2008, I worked at the Governor's Office on Women's Policy, and at the time they were looking to put us under DSS. Well, to put us under DSS, sort of like if you put our board under state police, our funding now goes into the general fund as well as into the state police fund, and we're budgeted under state police. So the state police will dictate how much or how little we have in terms of regulating our industry. And at that point, and when you get put under another agency, like what happened with OWP, your budget tends to get cut less and less. And then your actual purposes that you were originally mandated by statute are no longer there. You don't get the same level when you're put underneath another agency as when you are an independent agency regulating the licensing process.
Okay, we do have a question. Representative Pugh?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Again, my question was going back to that $19,000 in arrears that y'all haven't been able to collect. What policing abilities do y'all have to get this money collected?
We filed suit. The Attorney General's office filed the suits for us.
Okay.
With the appropriate parts of the state that these individuals were in. One, I think, in the meantime, has died. One, they claim they've never been able to.
That's uncollectible.
Yes, sir. One, they can't seem to locate. He seems to have left the state. And the other,
y'all are private investigators that find people?
I've offered to do that.
Okay. So y'all train them well. Also on here, I see that your legal fees have gone from $7,700 to $15,000 for the current budgeted year. Why such a doubling?
Well, our contract...
Is that to go back and collect those arrears, or...?
Actually, our legal fees are practically none. We have contracts. The contracts call for $40,000 a year, and we really don't come anywhere close to spending that much on legal issues. Most of the issues are handled by the Attorney General's office staff that helps us out tremendously and gives us a hand, and they charge us only when absolutely necessary, even though we have that contract in place with them.
Okay. And back to the young lady's comments, is that if it was under state police and the fees were being collected, it would be self-generating. It wouldn't have to worry about being cut in the budget, kind of like you do now.
Exactly.
You're saying if we moved under state police, we'd be self-generated? So if you moved under another agency, you don't become a budgeted within that agency?
Wouldn't that umbrella cover the fees that are collected from the licensing?
Well, that's what I'm asking you. I mean, does the state, I mean, our fees would go into the general fund, but when the state police would do their budget, they would decide, you know, so much for gaming, so much for PI, private investigative licensing regulation, and then, you know, they could either increase or decrease the amount of funds that we have.
Okay. Brian, can you answer?
Brian?
Maybe I'm not understanding.
Would that money be earmarked?
Okay, Brian, go ahead.
I'm certainly no budget expert, but
Right.
as I understand it, within the state fisc, there's general fund, and there are statutorily dedicated funds.
Correct.
And most fees, say hunting and fishing fees, they go into statutorily dedicated funds to run the Wildlife and Fisheries Office. And then there's a third possibility, which is these licensing boards, which that money never goes to the state fisc at all. It goes into their checking accounts. I think statutorily, and you all probably know better than I, but statutorily dedicated funds can be used for other purposes if the fiscal constraints are such that those monies need to be taken, say, from Wildlife and Fisheries and given to another agency. I think the legislature, through the appropriations process, has the authority to do that. So there's a way to protect it. To an extent, I guess, is how I would answer your question.
Right, and that's my great concern, is that you're protected to an extent. And like I said, I saw it firsthand when our agency at the time that I was working for as an intern was looking to be put under DSS. We dealt with domestic violence for women. And when you're put underneath another agency and in their budgetary guidelines, state police is already being cut. So when it looks time to be cut again, they look down the list and see, well, what's really not that important? What's really not our priority? We may not be a priority to the state police. And that is a great concern that I have, because we are an integral part of the legal system in terms of litigation and working with attorneys. And I think if you put us under the state police, not only budgetarily, I think as time goes on, we will face problems. You know, in terms of being able to provide the services that we do. I mean, we're pretty frugal with the money that we do get. And we're even looking to innovate a few other things that'll, you know, provide even more services to private investigators within reasonable amounts. And I think, you know, the fact that the state right now is getting a service, we are self-funded, and we don't have a lot of complaints because we are doing what we are supposed to do. We had a gentleman the other day who came for a hearing for a license, and his license was denied. The gentleman had probably 10, 15 charges against him. Most of them were dismissed. He had one, I think, misdemeanor that was a felony. He had a misdemeanor that he pled guilty to, and a felony he pled a nolo to, which is a guilty, that we had denied his license. We have several individuals who come before us who we do not license because they pose a threat to the industry, either from past conduct, from licensing, or things that they've done, criminal charges. One prime example of someone who is no longer licensed, who was employed by the City of New Orleans, was a gentleman who was working as for the third-party claims administrator and made over $500,000 from the City of New Orleans. He ended up as part of a federal investigation. His license was revoked. But these individuals go out there, the information and the things that we have access to because of our license, we have access to motor vehicle records, to driving records, information that can easily be used unscrupulously by an individual who may or may not be licensed. And if they are licensed, we can hold them accountable. If they are licensed, there are things in place that we can go after unlicensed investigators. And that is one of the things, I don't know if this budgetarily that the board took on that we wanted to do in the coming year was go after more of this unlicensed activity. It's becoming with the BP claims, and then after Katrina we had another issue with that. We start to get more and more people who come into the area, or people who decide they're going to start up a new career.
But without further legislation, you cannot do anything against unlicensed PI now.
Correct. We investigate the issue and we refer.
But you don't have any
no, we have to refer to the correct
at all.
Correct. We have to refer to the local district attorney's office for prosecution, or the attorney general's office can prosecute.
Steve, any more questions?
No, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Barrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. I'm looking at the spreadsheet here as it relates to the licenses, and I see that there is a dip for this current fiscal year, and then I see that it increases by 12,000. Can you explain why you guys have the dip, or what do you suspect is contributing to the fact as it relates to the licensing going down from last year, and then you guys project that it's going to go up next year?
It fluctuates every year. I'm not sure. The industry drives those numbers. Right now, we are nonstop with licensing, probably 5 a day. It's probably all because of the BP situation down in towards New Orleans, where they're doing, I think up to 1 million investigations are going on. That's driving those numbers. Typically, we stay about even every year. If you look historically back at the numbers, they stay in the neighborhood of between plus and minus 50 or so. That means we'll get an increase of that many, plus that many will drop out. So every year it just depends on the industry. If the work's there, it's fine. If it's not, they usually go on and work something else.
Yeah, and another reason for the projection could be the fact that we have the journeyman's license in place, which allows people to come in and do contract work for multiple agencies. You don't have to have, an agency has to have 3 years of experience. A journeyman does not, because they will work directly for the agency. Usually a journeyman is someone who's experienced in a particular field, and they'll get licensed so that they can have the ability to work for more than one agency, unlike an apprentice or an individual who can only work for that particular agency that they are licensed under.
Okay. Mr. Englund, are you a full-time employee?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then lastly, as I look at the committee makeup, seems like you guys do well geography-wise and gender-wise. Tell me about the racial makeup.
No African Americans.
No African Americans or any other race?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And how many African Americans or any other race do you have in this industry? Do y'all know?
Ooh, quite a bit.
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever broke it down into race, but there is quite, especially in the Baton Rouge area, there's quite a number. I would say probably 30%.
About 30%?
Yeah.
And so as it relates to the board appointments, why would you think that you guys have no representation at all?
We don't, of course, we don't make board appointments. That comes out of the governor's office.
Or service commission? So do y'all make any recommendations?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am, we do not.
Okay.
They don't ask for us, and we don't give. They've never asked us for any recommendations at all.
Okay. Thank
Under
you.
the Blako administration, there was only one female on the board, and whenever I came on the board, there was then 3 females on the board and 4 males. So we balanced the ratio there. We had one African American who was an attorney, and she was replaced this year by a male. So now we have 2 females, and the rest are males on the board.
Okay. Thank you for that information.
Representative Legee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, folks. Would you please walk me through the licensure process?
Typically you would come in and get an application, and it entails a tremendous amount of information that you have to provide back to the board. Once you've established all the information, you've given it back to the board, we then go through the background check process. We have to make sure that they meet all the criteria of the license that they're actually requesting. Once the background check comes back from the state police, we do a federal and state background check to make sure no PI in the state of Louisiana can be a convicted felon. So we have to look at that very carefully. And once that comes back, if it's an agency license and they meet all the criteria, it's gone through the background. We've done all the due diligence on the background information that they provided to us. The agency license then goes before the full board, and they have to speak before the board and sell their information, and the board will either approve or disapprove.
Okay. And the criteria are what? I think it's specifically listed in statute?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You
Age.
it's based on age, background,
Citizenship.
citizenship. You can't, like I said, you can't have any felony charges, convictions in your background. You must meet the background check completely. There's a good bit of information on the application itself. I don't have one right in front of me.
Is there anything in the licensure process that you do that the state police cannot do?
Obviously, if they're using state police personnel, they probably would be more expensive for them to do than for us. If they're using state police personnel to do investigations and going that route, I'm not sure that it would not be more costly for the state to do it.
Wait, what investigations?
Well,
background?
if you're going to give the whole procedure to the state police, I would assume at that point that the state police would have to do the background checks. They would have to do the investigations. They would have to do the follow-ups. I'm assuming at that point they would use state police to do that, unless they contract. I'm not sure how they would go about doing that.
What other investigations other than the background check do y'all do?
Well, we do obviously complaints and
No, I'm just talking about licensure right now.
Oh, just licensure?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, most of the background checks we get back from state police are not complete. Very few that I get have a final disposition on the charges.
Correct.
Therefore, I have to go in and we have to start looking, going back to, if it's in another state, we have to go to another state and verify that those charges existed, what was the final disposition on them. If it's in the state of Louisiana, we have to do the same thing here. We may have to go to a clerk of court's office in a particular parish and start pulling records to make sure the disposition of the case. We just have to make sure through that process that these individuals are not convicted felons. That's the biggest issue we're looking for at that point. And unfortunately, in state police records, I'm not too sure whose fault that is, if it's anybody's fault. I don't know if it's because clerk of court's offices in certain parishes are not reporting to the state in a timely manner. But most of the background, I've looked at thousands of background checks over my career. There are very few on a typical background check that comes back where there is a final disposition on it.
Correct.
That's surprising to me, to be perfectly honest. It's kind of scary also.
It is because
scary.
Recently, and the other thing I just wanted to add to the question that you addressed to Ms. Inglade was the fact that, correct, the guy that came before our board that had 20-something charges, there was no dispositions on those. So individually, and they were scattered in a multitude of jurisdictions, had to go back and get that information from the clerks of court to understand, was it a NOLO? Because his understanding was it was dismissed. I didn't put it on my application because as an applicant, he understood it was dismissed. Well, it was a NOLO contendere. He only had one null pros, which is actually a dismissal. He did have some guilty pleas. He just didn't quite understand, and the records from the state police were not sufficient enough to, and that's why we have Pat and Delhan in place that go in and go beyond that. On agency applications, typically they also have to go in and verify the 3 years of experience, where they contact either the prior employer or agency that they've worked for in terms of, what did this person do? Are they a good employee? Then when those agencies come before the board, and this is where the experience factor, I think, comes in to making a good decision in terms of who we hire and put it, well, not hire, but who we license into the industry, is that we interview each candidate. So that 3 years of experience we can ensure is done in some sort of investigative capacity to where you interviewed witnesses. I mean, it doesn't matter what feel that you've had the opportunity or you have testified in court before, so that you understand the evidentiary procedure, and that when you do go to court and you do testify, what is expected of you as a private investigator. In terms of types of work, if it's surveillance, and that you have spent over those 3 years, I have 3 years of experience. Well, was it 2 days a week or was it 5 days a week? What exactly is that experience? So in interviewing the candidates that come before us and getting an understanding of what they do, to me, is a critical part of being sure that that person is competent, because we have several people who come from the insurance claims industry, or they come from a collection agency and they want to be licensed as an investigator. While you are limited to only provide services for which you are competent and knowledgeable to do, the problem with that is once you've licensed them with that and they have access to motor vehicle records and other personal records, the potential for someone who doesn't understand the ramifications within the legal arena by licensing a claims adjuster or someone like that, or a collection person, you're letting someone into the industry that can potentially be a threat to the public. So I think in the interview, the agency stage of the application to me is essential and crucial for what we do.
Let me ask you, how many candidates, say, let's take 2010, how many candidates did you reject in 2010?
Oh, I can't give you off the top. I can tell you at these board meeting, at least because I'm the one who presents them, we have probably about maybe 7 to 10, and at least 1 to 2, maybe 3 are denied. And usually if there is a denial, and at that level when they're coming to us, background is usually not an issue. With them, it becomes more of an issue of what is their actual experience. And what are they actually doing? If you're coming to us and primarily you're doing X and then you maybe did investigative work 1 day a week, well, that's really not enough experience to go out there and be an agency and have be endowed with the task of employing other investigators within the industry. You don't have the experience to go out there and meet with clients and conduct investigations at a level that you should be.
So, and who makes that decision? Or how many people make that decision?
The entire board makes that decision.
And, well, but somebody, explain that process. Somebody presents it to the board?
Correct. I'm the one who calls up the applicants. I explain to the board what is the applicant's background. Typically, when an agency is coming to us, they've taken the 40-hour course, they passed the state exam, and they've either worked as an individual or apprentice or journeyman for an agency in the past, or they have investigative experience from a governmental agency or some other entity which they're trying to use as that 3 years of experience, which is where we get into the gray area. When you get someone whose experience or is not directly related in any way to the legal environment, which is typically what you're doing as a private investigator, and then you're coming to us for licensing. Let's say all you did was collection work, which you sent out form letters and you didn't do anything that was truly investigative related, but now you want an investigator's license, which enables you to go out and do certain things that you're probably not knowledgeable enough to do without having. And a lot of times when we do deny people, we'll tell them you need to maybe go work under an agency and get that experience. You need to be an individual or an apprentice and gain the experience of what is needed to go out there and be an agency.
Is that a realistic demand of a person, though?
What do you mean in terms of?
Well, I'm a little concerned because sometimes these professional boards and commissions tend to kind of watch out for themselves and keep things at a particular, the participants at a particular number because there's only so much work to go around.
No, sir. I will tell you, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Sure.
I will tell you this.
Go ahead. I'll let you do that.
That's okay. My husband, we have that issue.
God bless him.
Yeah, you think I could talk for an hour? You just wait. No, we can order lunch.
I think we're going to do a 3-minute rule shortly.
Is that for response or rebuttal?
Total. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. In terms of, now you see, I forgot the question now.
Good.
Well, basically just going back to the point that professions sometimes tend to become very closed.
Yes.
And if it's an issue of subjective appreciation of somebody's qualifications, that sometimes that can be used to kind of close the door on people.
I'll give you two examples of how ethics has been moved to a higher standard at this board. Number one, I don't look at it in terms of limiting people who come into the industry. The more people that are out there within the industry in terms of an agency means that there are more competent people out there to regulate the business, and so many out-of-state companies won't be coming in here and doing work. I do not have a problem, or I think any of the board members, and even though the evaluation is subjective, want to allow people into the industry that are going to be a detriment to us, that are going to go out there and do things that are inappropriate. In fact, a lot of the old school tactics are things that we are weeding out in terms of people who are already licensed, people who think it's okay to put a GPS on a vehicle on a workers' comp case when it's against the law, people who think it's okay to pretext and go out and represent themselves as working for the plaintiff when they actually work for the defense.
Let me stop you there. But it is against the law, so there is redress in law,
yes,
correct?
Sir. Yes, sir. But I'm saying the problem with that is you have people who come in to the industry who don't have that knowledge, who don't come from a legal environment or come from working with litigation. They don't understand all the issues in terms of gathering evidence, that if you're standing on another person's property and you're trespassing and you're obtaining surveillance video, and we have a Third Circuit and a Fifth Circuit decision where the video is inadmissible because it was obtained during the time that they were charged with criminal trespass.
But isn't a test given in conjunction with the application process? Didn't I hear you say that?
Yes, sir. There is a state
Okay, so doesn't
exam.
the test address things like that?
The test is for all licenses. It's the same test for an agency as for an individual as for an apprentice. The agency is held to a higher standard because the agency is able to employ individuals, apprentices, and journeymen under them. That agency has to be held to a higher standard to preserve the integrity and the competence within our industry.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. One more thing.
Go ahead, go ahead.
The other thing I wanted to tell you was in terms of ethics that we have put in place as a board in the policies and procedures manual that we developed, we put in there, and it wasn't in there before, so that there is no abuse of my position, in particular training and education. And it has happened in the past where as training and education you can choose not to approve certain people, so you limit the number of people who are offering continuing education. The way that we put ethics in place into the policies and procedures is I myself, as chairman, cannot teach or profit in any way from continuing education while I serve on the board and for 2 years after the board. I can't receive any complimentary or discounted continuing education.
Excuse me, but when did that start?
Last year.
Just last year, that's correct.
Yes, sir, that's
so right now you do have people that are teaching that was board members, is that correct?
No, sir.
You sure of that?
Current board members?
No, not current.
Oh.
Past board members that are teaching right now.
Yes, sir, because it just went into place recently. And the reason it went into place is because when I wanted to put in changes to the continuing education, some of the board members who had served in the past said, well, we like what you're trying to do, but you need to understand that there's been a past abuse of your situation. And they sort of looked at me skeptically.
So you're going to grandfather those people?
We can look at doing that at our March 22nd meeting. I don't have a problem doing that at all.
I may not be in favor of grandfathering. Yeah. Okay, Representative Leach, any more questions? Okay. Representative Barrow?
Yes, thank you. I have one last question. Representative
And
Leach.
if you'd like.
Yeah. He kind of opened up a Pandora's box because that really leads to a lot of other questions that it's not directly related to you guys. But it seems like this is kind of labor intensive, the process with the licensing. So on average, how long does it take to approve anyone who comes with their application, and do that applicant appear before the board during the hearing?
It depends. We get a license.
Need to talk into the mic, please.
That we get those licenses out just as quickly as we can. It typically takes Texas about 6 months. I've heard, to get their licenses out. We typically, and they're under their Department of Public Safety there, and we do ours much quicker because we're right there to do it. We have the access to do it. We deal directly with the state police in getting the background checks back. It depends mainly on the background check, to be honest with you. If I've got to do homework on the background, the case they were talking about earlier with the young man that had the extensive background, he had a murder charge on there that he failed, and it had no disposition on it, so I had to dig deep in that and spend almost 2.5 weeks just on that license myself, dealing with it. Some come back very quickly. We have a considerable amount of former law enforcement officers that are doing private investigative work. Most of their backgrounds are very clean. A lot of federal. Right now, they're like, I think that's what BP's looking for, is former law enforcement right now. A lot of those are former FBI, ATF, a lot of City of New Orleans police officers.
So on average?
An agency license would be done, because we only hold the board meeting every other month, would be done within, for sure within 60 days. If it's a journeyman's, apprentice, or individual, within 8 to 10 days.
Okay, thank you.
And that's waiting on the background check to come back.
Okay, I have several questions. First, let's talk a little bit about the history of the board. I noticed that over the years they've had quite a few complaints, television and newspaper articles about the board.
Yes, sir.
What have y'all done to straighten the image of the board?
We hold ourselves to a higher standard, and it was from my area from which a lot of the complaints came from. That's the 5th Public Service District for the state of Louisiana. Right now, no complaints.
What about your audits, your last several audits? How have they been?
They're fine.
Yeah, in all the years, and I read all the audit reports, we only had 3 audits that were, I think, C or below, and all the activities that were detailed in those audit reports dealt with board members who had sort of misappropriation of funds. One of the board members actually resulted in charges against him. Also, they were also contracting issues where someone on the board had contracted with someone that he was also doing business with. With Pat and the staff in the office, as well as ourselves as board members, we are, stewards to other board members on the board with us. So if there is something, and since we've been on the board, if something does come up that is not correct or is unethical, we address it. And in fact, recently a situation we had was the board made a decision to exempt itself from continuing education. As training and education chairman, I'm, not overly, promoting that. But before I made a decision on that, I went and looked at what other boards do. I went and looked at truly what the educational value is in terms of what we do, not only in the board meeting, but outside the board meeting related to our industry. And I looked at what other boards within our state do in terms of that. So we went ahead and we did that, but just to make sure that we're doing it correct, and it's not an abuse of power or discretion, I submitted to the ethics board for an opinion. And typically, if there's any situation that we feel is either a conflict or presents a problem or could present a problem, we seek an ethics opinion or an attorney general's opinion.
So y'all already voted on that, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So y'all voted to exempt the board members from continuing education, is that correct?
Correct. Now, I personally...
Okay. All right. What about... Let's get back to this manual about spending the money. Are y'all ready to do another manual now, is what you're telling me?
We have already in the process of it.
You just spent $50,000 a while back, is that correct? And then you're going to spend some additional monies on it?
The last time the manual was updated was in 2000. Since 2000... the laws that are listed in the book in terms of the federal and state laws specifically, as well as our own PI law, 80% of those laws have been revised, and new additional laws that impact our industry in terms of serendipitous video and the spoofing on the federal level are not in those manuals. To go ahead and just do an update or a supplement is what we were originally going to do. Then when we looked at the whole manual in and of itself, then I looked at what the statute mandates that we were supposed to include in the manual. There were some things in there that I thought were insufficient. And the manual itself, while we were looking at revising such a large portion of it, 80% of it, There were areas I felt that could have been enhanced in terms of there was nothing in there about the Louisiana codal system and how does Louisiana's laws and statutes and the civil code integrate. And as an investigator, you need to know that.
Okay, so y'all are in the process now
Yes,
of doing
sir.
another
Yes, sir.
manual. And how much will that cost?
It's going to cost the board absolutely nothing.
It's going to cost it nothing?
Nothing.
Okay. But the first one did cost $50,000.
That is my understanding. I was
Okay.
not a part of
Throw around at that.
I understand.
And my understanding is the original manual, I think, I'm not even going to tell you how it was done or who actually contributed to it because I'm not exactly sure. But the way we're doing it, and also make sure that future revisions are somewhat cost efficient as this is done. The law students that were working on it, we have 8 law students and 2 law professors that are working on it, as well as the board attorney, Trey Fayard, who's going to review the entire manual, and then Angelique with the Attorney General's office is also going to review it. So we have a lot of legal input. We're also putting it in-house to where the board will produce the manual as the classes come every year. Instead of producing 3,000 manuals, and then by the time you're halfway through the manuals, the laws have changed, and the things that you're teaching in the class are no longer applicable. So we're making it so where the board in-house can change the manual on a regular basis and print it currently,
Right.
without having to go through this whole revision process.
Okay. And well, that sounds like a really good idea, getting the university involved in it. I think that's really good. Let's talk about the attorneys. We're talking about, you'd mentioned $40,000 a year, is that correct?
That's the terms of the contract, yes, sir.
So you have them under contract for $40,000 a year, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So they get $40,000?
Oh, no, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Oh, the contract is done by the number of cases
I don't
that they
think I've
handle?
spent $10,000 on both attorneys in the last year on attorneys.
Absolutely.
Okay. But you had to draw a number for, okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's typically what they use according to contract review.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a very pointed question.
Okay.
Do you think that the state police could do this function as well as you do?
I think the state police can do any function they want to do.
Okay.
Would it be more cost effective? Probably not. The state right now receives this effort from this board at no cost to the state whatsoever. The members and the people that hold licenses pay for everything.
But that money would go toward the state police. That would go to their coffers to be able to run the program.
That's assuming that everybody would continue to do things the right way and the state police would have the personnel to take on this responsibility. When I was with the police department in Baton Rouge, we farmed out all this licensing. It was too much. I didn't want that responsibility underneath me. We sent it over to revenue because we didn't want to enforce. When you got real crime going on, you don't want to have to deal with licensing people.
I understand that. Now, over the last several years, you have to admit that we did give the state police a lot of extra work, but it's all work that will be paid for, because of fees and things like that, such as gambling or gaming, I should say.
May I? I'm sorry.
You certainly may.
Okay. I will anyway, but okay. No, I don't think the state police can do the same job as our board. For the main reason, not that I don't think they're incompetent, I think their focus is on, and I think they're very competent in what they do, which is related to the criminal field. The core of what private investigators do in this state is related to civil. And I think the contrast between the two, and that is a huge problem we have in terms of licensing people who come from just a patrol officer background and who don't have the detective level in terms of evidentiary and testifying in court. I don't think that the state police who are used to dealing, and in terms of enforcing gaming, you're dealing with truly a criminal side. In private investigative, what we do, the majority of our licensing is dealing with the civil side in terms of litigation and evidentiary issues, which are not something state police typically fool with.
Okay, I think we have one other person that would like to speak, and that's Natalie, and I can't pronounce the last name, starts with a B. Go ahead, all right. Good job.
Should I just do it for back?
No, you have to testify at the desk.
I'll get it.
Oh, wait.
And I'm sorry I couldn't pronounce the name.
No, that's okay.
I'll,
Everyone usually refers to me as Natalie B. For that reason.
you will be referred to the same way at this committee.
Thank you for giving me a few minutes to speak.
Sure, certainly.
My whole goal of being here today is that whether or not state police takes this board over, or if it remains as it is, it serves as a launching point to help make this board what it should have been as a governing body to protect the citizens of the state of Louisiana, as well as the services that we provide to attorneys that are relying on us for the accuracy of information that we present. And then I'm going to kind of go off track and respond to a couple of issues that were brought up.
Sure.
Ms. Dugas indicated to you that we have 42 states that have licensing. The thing she did leave out of that is that the majority of those licenses are under state police, Department of Public Safety, Secretaries of State, and the Attorney General, followed by individual investigative and security boards. I'm a little nervous.
Take your time.
Okay.
No problem.
I think that was an oversight there that I wanted to make very clear. A second oversight I think that needs to be addressed is that the LPIA is our state association, of which Ms. Dugas represents. We currently have approximately 1,500 private investigators in the state, but only 147 people are members of the state association. So I cannot say that that is a true reflective, supportive issue of the majority of private investigators.
Okay.
A third issue that I would like to bring out is that I have been a private investigator since 1979, over 30 years. I started out before video cameras. When licensing came in 1993, I encouraged it, and because of one reason, to help raise the standards and the quality of the people working in our profession, that we can no longer just hang up a shingle on a door and say, I'm a private investigator. With that, and over these last 20 years, that the board has now been here 18 years, federal laws, state laws have all increased tremendously. This profession is not getting easier to do, it is getting harder to do, and requires a higher level of proficiency every day to keep up with both the changing laws and mandates that we are required to do to uphold a level of professionalism. If you speak to many attorneys, and I have pulled many, the quality of investigators that are presently out here working is dismal. I myself have a very difficult time finding someone to work for my agency that I feel comfortable enough, that has received the basic enough training to even write an activity report. Now, I served on this board for 3.5 years, and I resigned. And I'm going to tell you the reason for my resignation. This board financially had almost run itself into the ground with financial irresponsibility. Their solution to that was to raise our agency fees, as well as to develop a journeyman's license. And I think it's very important that you understand what this journeyman license does. These people are taking a 40-hour class. They come out of a class. They cannot write a basic activity report. They cannot shoot basic video. They cannot do basic research. They are then allowed to subcontract themselves to any investigator in the state of Louisiana, and each agency that uses their services is responsible and liable for what they do and don't do. What agency wants to take that liability on? Number one. Number two, from an insurance perspective, I don't want to put my agency at that risk. And I've even tried using one just to test the field and had very dismal results with the use of that journeyman. I believe that that issue could have been very easily resolved within its own means. Agency license owners not only have to have an extreme understanding of civil actions, criminal actions, because, as they said, we're seeing increases in fraud every day that we're dealing with, but we also have to have an ability to understand and do our business, run a business, manage employees. The individual license holders that worked under agencies only have to have 3 years of investigatory background in order to receive an agency license. Well, most agencies, when they hire somebody under an individual license, first year, they're complete overhead. Second year, I'm making a little bit of money with them, but I'm still training a lot because there's no really sound preparatory course. Number four, the third thing that happens, by the third year, they're claiming to have 3 years investigatory experience, and they're going out and getting an agency license and trying to take your clients or whatever that they've taken from you. So in history, what most agencies do is they withhold properly training these people. They train them on one aspect. I'm going to teach one person how to do research. Then I'm going to teach one person how to do surveillance. I'm going to teach one person how to go out and do statements. And then what happens, those people get an agency license. Yes, they did 40 hours a week doing statements, 40 hours a week doing surveillance. But when they become an agency, you're no longer dealing with one aspect. You're dealing with all the aspects. And that, to me, is a big issue, that there should be a standard of criteria. Law enforcement people go through 6 to 8 weeks of training, and then they ride with an officer. We go through a 40-hour course. Now, for an individual license holder that is working under one agency and only one agency, I think that could be fine. And I think that that individual then has to be able to develop a certain level of professional experience, not just by subjective opinion, but by specialized criteria that they're capable of having an agency. But on the issue of a journeyman taking a 40-hour course and out to hire for any investigative agency, the risk to the community is great. Because my agency, this agency may all operate individually differently, yet I am going to hold the majority of liability for whatever that person does right or wrong. And that brings on one other issue. Yes, the board did revoke a license on someone who was buying NCIC information. They didn't initiate this. The feds had already busted them. The feds, the law enforcement, had already brought these issues to the surface. This was a follow-up to what law enforcement had done. Another issue with that is they say that we do not have convicted criminals that work as private investigators. Then I would like to understand why Texas has reciprocity with the state of Louisiana, but Louisiana does not have reciprocity with Texas. And the reason why Texas denied us reciprocity is because we have convicted criminals acting as private investigators. So, and this predated my dates on the board. These people from Texas are coming here working on reciprocity. They don't have to pay a licensing fee or anything. But if I want to go do work in Texas, I have to reapply for a new license and everything else because there are convicted criminals that hold PI licenses in the state of Louisiana. I have a problem with that. As a former board member, these are the reasons I resigned. Because I believe that if we are truly going to protect the citizens, if we're truly going to protect the attorneys that we work for, then we have to be at almost a comparable level of work that we do has to be very close to what law enforcement does. Because when I work a criminal defense case, if I am not accurate in the data that I present to these attorneys, I may help a criminal get off because I didn't know my job or I didn't do my job right or have the case thrown out because of my lack of professionalism.
Ma'am, you're telling me that somebody is practicing as a private investigator in the state of Louisiana that has a criminal history. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Wait.
Wait, whoa.
okay.
This is not going to be a debate. We're going to talk one at a time. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Right.
In terms of that, the reason we do not have reciprocity with Texas is because of the fact Louisiana has the first felony pardon. So if you were convicted of a felony, by law, you get a first felony pardon. That is the main issue that Texas has with Louisiana in terms
So they don't have the same law?
No, in terms of first felony. So that's why they will not allow. So you can be convicted of a felony, and then you can get a first felony pardon, and we cannot deny you a license because you've been pardoned for the crime.
Okay. Representative Leegee.
Well, just going back to the question, though, and this will go to the LPIA person. Do you know of anybody who has been convicted of a crime that is practicing? You don't have to name anybody, but you have to name them. But
You mean convicted and has a first felony pardon?
yes. You don't have to say a name.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do. Can I also add to that in terms of the journeyman's license and clarify something on that issue? Journeyman's license has the same criteria as the agency and individual. The journeyman, the ability of the journeyman allows him to work for multiple agencies. The individual license holder has the same experience and the same background as a journeyman and can work for multiple agencies as long as they obtain a license under that agency. The development of the journeyman license was done by the prior board, not myself. We instituted the rules and regulations. And the purpose was to allow the individual not to have to go get a license under agency A, agency B, agency C, but to have one license to say, I am licensed, I have met the minimum licensing requirements of the state, and now I will be working under your agency. The journeyman license also states that the agency must treat the journeyman as if they would treat an apprentice. There are also a logging process that the journeyman has, as well as additional limitations that ensure that whatever agency is hiring them is training them and is responsible for what they are doing. So it's up to the agency's discretion to even hire these people. Sort of like when someone comes to me to apply for a job. If your resume and your background is clearly not matching, or your skill set is not matching the appropriate work I have, I'm not going to hire you. Now, does that mean they're not able to hold a license in our state? They've completed the 40-hour course, they've gone through the application process as well as the background, and they've passed the state board exam. And the statute, the way it's set up, it says we shall license them, and we do, because they have nothing that would, give us cause not to. But I think, okay, go ahead.
Is it correct that the LPIA is membership is a very, very small, it sounds like a very small percentage of actually the license?
I think when you have to understand the total licensing in the state is between 1,300 to 1,500. Agencies are around 300. Agencies are mainly your members in your LPIA. There are some individuals and journeymen that are now starting to come into the association, but typically it's your agencies. So when you look at it representative-wise, it's maybe half of what the agencies are out there. And the LPIA is an association who was initially the driving force in getting private investigators license, as well as they operate as a watchdog in terms of catching a lot of these past things that have gone on with the board and discrepancies, and bringing them to light so that everyone in the industry knows what's going on.
Is that the only association in Louisiana?
Yes, sir, that I'm aware of, unless there's...
Okay. Thank you.
So you're a member at large, is that correct, on the commission?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think that
I belong, before I got elected, I was a member of a board and commission, and we would not allow that. We would certainly not allow that.
Well, the reason, this is part of the legislation in terms of how the board is made up.
Right.
And it also, the people who can serve on the board, you can't have more than 2 individuals from one agency serve on the board. I think the reason that it was put into the legislation is because the LPIA was instrumental in the development of the legislation. Now, granted...
That's understandable.
But
yeah.
let me explain to you my position as member at large. A list of names is submitted by the LPIA to the governor. He chooses from those names who is going to be appointed to the board. Once I'm appointed to the board, I am a board member. My duties and allegiance to the interest of that organization are no longer what I bring to the table. It is what is statutorily mandated and what is correct under the law. I do not specifically serve on that board, and there's several instances, one related to, I was trying to, online continuing education is now you can obtain it through 8 hours. I was trying to limit it to 2 hours, and that is an issue I was in direct conflict with the association on.
I would see it as a bit of a conflict of interest, so I may look at changing that law for sure. Okay, Representative Leege. Oh, you done? Okay. Yes, ma'am, you can.
I'd like to respond to a couple of things that were said
Sure.
there. The actual reason that the journeyman's license did come in was for financial reasons. And at the time that I was on the board 3.5 years ago, about 400 people took the private investigator 40-hour course, and only 2% were getting hired. This year, from what I just heard them say, 215 people took the course. So the revenues were going down. Again, the agency owners do not want to hire these people. They are not getting the training and or education that they should be, and the board feels it's our responsibility to govern over these employees, that they're not implementing the proper training, rules and regulations to make sure that the community is safe. That if 400 people, only 2% can get hired, there's a reason for that. And you don't just create another license that costs the same thing as an agency license to try to fix the problem. You look internally at what the problem is, you do your own cost-cutting measures with your fixed and variable cost, and then you look at the individual license that you already have in place, at least if they hold a license under different agencies. That agency is directly responsible for them. It is different than a journeyman coming out of a 40-hour course with no added training that I even have to teach them the very basics on how to shoot a piece of video or write a report.
Yes, ma'am. I think we understand the situation here. And do you have any short final comments?
I have one final thing to say.
Okay, very short.
There are a lot of people that took the private investigator course and passed the exam that couldn't find sponsors. And this is a way for those people who could not find sponsors to go ahead and get licensed and market themselves to the agencies in different areas, and they are on the website.
Okay.
Investigators in that area can look on the website and see they have a journeyman here. I'll grab him before I have to go over to Joe Blow over here, who I'm having a fight with, and use this person and send my good guy out with
that doesn't protect the community.
Okay. No debating.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Yes, sir. The only other
Short,
thing I wanted...
very short.
Oh, okay.
All right.
You got the stopwatch started?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
The only thing I wanted to say was to address in terms of agency competence and due diligence. The agency that my husband and I started in 1997, no matter what the training is that you get from the state board, like I said, it is foundational training. In-house, as an agency, you should, in terms of due diligence, train your investigators to specifically what you want done and how you want things done. So we have a 3-month training process that we go through with all investigators that are hired, and if you do contract work for us, you have to come in and go through a 1-month training process because you have a little bit more advanced skills, but still we want to make sure that you understand the type of work we do and what we're looking for in terms of our video and steadiness and the uses. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for coming here. It's very enlightening.
Thank
very
you.
enlightening.
Appreciate it. Sorry about that.
Okay, next